My brain was going crazy. I truly thought I had lost my mind. And I remember ridiculously running around looking for it. I was unfortunately going from bad to worse, and I was worried that I was going to have what seemed inevitable, a bad trip. Nothing man-made seemed to make any sense. I remember giving the grill on the fire a good stare, trying to figure out what the hell it does, or what it's meant to be. Lana and I left work on Friday and went straight to my house. I was very hasty in my choice of Woods clothing, but I managed to find something comfortably suited for the occasion. We left my house straight for Jay's, where he was ready to shoot off on our 25-minute drive out to the river. Zing and Muffy were about 15 minutes ahead of us on the journey, and by the time we arrived, they had already set up one of the tents and a gorgeous fire. How perfect. Zing and Muffy had quite remarkably picked the single most perfect and secluded spot in the place. It was beautiful, right on the riverbank, yet deep in the woods. This was to be the setting for the most loony night of my life. When Lana, myself, and Jay arrived on the scene, we were greeted with what looked like a tiny sack of 4-year-old cauliflower. My enthusiasm for the grub ahead didn't do the trip any justice, as I couldn't quite believe that within such a tiny bag would lie my total and utter retreat to insanity, although my curiosity for the wonders of my own mind is what I was really keen for. We were each handed a bag of what I was told was 2 grams worth of shrooms, but because Lana wasn't shrooming this evening, there was going to be a bag left over. Zing then pulled out a bag containing about 5 grams of hash and handed it to me. We decided we wouldn't munch the Munchables right then, as we were all pretty hungry, and pretty much dying for something to eat, other than shrooms for the time being. We killed the fire, poked down the coals, flipped over and greased the grill, got out the food, and marinated the whole lot. After some of the food was finished cooking, and after we all had a little bite to eat, and not to mention a few hot knives of hash, we decided, while worrying about the weather, to munch down half of our bags because it was also getting a bit dark. I had heard and read about the feelings of vomiting soon after taking the mushrooms, but it never really bothered me because I can pretty much hold down anything. And after hearing Jay mutter next to me that it's really not that bad, I figured the rest of the shrooming world worried about the taste. We're all pussies. Then, soon after that first little fingerful that I managed to scrape out the clear bag and throw into my mouth, I realized why Muffy and Zing were eating theirs with a few blocks of chocolate. It was fucking revolting. I grabbed some chocolate and guzzled it into my mouth and prayed that it would mask the foul taste that hovered around my gums and teeth. Just as I managed to get that little morsel down, I felt that sickening feeling swell from my stomach and very nearly vomited right there on the spot. I had only just had about 1/10 of the bag. There was still a whole load more to come. As you can well imagine, I wasn't happy about eating the rest, but I am very happy to also tell you that that was the only mouthful that actually tasted foul, and the rest, with the chocolate of course, smooth sailed all the way to my stomach. It was, as Jay earlier had muttered, really not that bad. We stood around the campfire after devouring all together a sum total of 4 grams of shrooms and waited with bated breath. Jay and I were the only two who hadn't had the pleasure of such psychedelics before, and also after smoking the hash we were pretty much calm and relaxed about the mile trip ahead. Or so we thought. Now, Zing had that day just bought 2 deck chairs, and Muffy had already had 2 from his house. A sum total of 4 chairs, and seeing as they were all taken all the time, I figured I would stand, and this is why I think the shrooms hit me first. I was having a smoke around the fire with a beer in my hand, and we were all just having a good old stoner chat. But every time I looked at a different person, or changed my angle where I was standing, a different scenario appeared. A captivating scenario with my friends as the focal point. The trees and grass in the background suddenly played a very big role in these scenarios, and I couldn't quite figure out why. Perhaps because the trees and plants seemed to be surrounding us. I very successfully convinced myself numerous times that the idea of this was dumb, and that this wasn't actually happening, especially since it had only been about 15 minutes since we munched, and no one else was noticing the same thing, or at least they weren't admitting to it. Suddenly everything became extremely funny. Even the slightest little look from a friend would make me crack up and fall to the floor with laughter. I also noticed that the ground was doing some really funny shit. I could not stand still because the ground was moving so much. Due to this, I was constantly losing my balance and even sometimes fell over. By this time, it was quite dark, and the only light around was the fire which, as fires do, lit up everything in its immediate area and left everything else pitch black. We couldn't see outside our immediate vicinity, and this dark world around us was very intriguing to me. It was definitely time to explore. It had started to rain just a little bit and Lana had gone to the car to wait it out. But then it stopped, and Muffy prompted me to get her out of the car and join us. I figured I'd just shout. There was no one for miles and there wasn't any other noise. She'd hear me just fine, so I shouted, "Lana, it stopped raining!" Muffy, Zing, and Jay all looked at me as if to say, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" They then proceeded to tell me that my shout was softer than a normal conversation and that I probably wouldn't have woken up a Rottweiler. Somehow I fucked that up, and only after Muffy shouted did I know how soft I actually did shout. It was pathetic, but it sure did make me laugh. Muffy jumped up and screamed out to everyone that these mushrooms were definitely making their way to his head and that he wanted to go on an adventure. Zing, who at this point kept on seeing things out of the corner of his eye, was very keen on the idea, and we all decided to go and check out the abandoned house that sits in the middle of this big field, not too far away. We walked about 100 meters away from camp and jumped this wall, which was about 5 feet high. We got to this grassy field, but this was no ordinary grassy field. The ground had big bumps on it, which made it very hard to walk, and in retrospect, I don't quite know if they were actually there or not. Nevertheless, we made our way to this house. We propped our beers on one of the walls and started to investigate. We went walking through the house, trying to figure out what it would once have been used for, and eventually came to the conclusion that it must have been a school. We left the house and started to make our way back. Halfway across the field, we stopped to have a rest and a smoke, and I started to get a little worried about how we would get back because I couldn't quite remember the way home. If I had rational thought at the time, I would have realized that we were moments away from camp, and if we looked through the trees, we could see Jay and Lana. But rational thought was far, far away, and I had no idea where the hell I was. Nor had I any idea how long we sat in the middle of that fucking field, but it seemed like days. Then in the middle of this field, I started noticing little lights darting across through it, and also noticed the strangest patterns in front of my eyes, namely Rizla for some strange reason. I never took the time to investigate as I was pretty much shit scared and wanted to get back to camp. The way back didn't seem like the right way, as all of a sudden we had to now get off this 2-story high drop. It confused the shit out of me, because by this time I could see the camp, but didn't understand why the hell we were taking a new route. It turned out this 2-story high drop was merely the 5 feet wall we had jumped what seemed like eons ago. And once we were down, we cried out with this great gut-wrenching laughter. The worrying I had experienced earlier had now turned into great personal turmoil in my quest for rational thought. My brain was going crazy. I truly thought I had lost my mind. And I remember ridiculously running around looking for it. I was unfortunately going from bad to worse, and I was worried that I was going to have what seemed inevitable, a bad trip. My mind was racing, and the only thing that was in my head that I could understand were the words, "What the fuck?" Nothing man-made seemed to make any sense. I remember giving the grill on the fire a good stare, trying to figure out what the hell it does, or what it's meant to be. I knew that it was hot, and that there was food on it earlier, but didn't quite know what to make of it. It was a frightening feeling, as I wasn't quite sure that I was going to come out of this with my mind intact. The thoughts in my head were hard to keep track of and rarely made any sense either. Every thought had a few sub-thoughts, and those in turn had sub-thoughts of their own. These thoughts shot through my head at what seemed like 1,000,000 miles per hour, and never seemed to stop, but somehow flowed in one big continuous loop, permanent playback. Trying to figure all these thoughts out was near impossible, but I sought comfort by explaining them to myself, verbally. So there I was running around a fucking forest yapping my head off to myself or whoever had the patience to listen. And those that did wouldn't understand the super lingo I was speaking. If the mental police had rocked up, they wouldn't even take us away or lock us up. They would have shot us right on the spot for being totally insane. Jay and I found this eerie light emitting from the horizon, which absolutely captivated me, as everything did, because I was trying to make sense of it. I remember trying to get as close as I could to the thing, but obviously the river was holding me back. I couldn't quite figure out if this light was just in my mind or was actually real, because I came to the conclusion that the light wasn't in the trees, if that makes any sense. Every now and then, I would utter something that seemed to be completely rational, as if I wasn't insane, as if I was just fine. This happened about 3 times throughout the trip, and it probably lasted each time for about 1 or 2 seconds. In other words, hardly ever, but boy was I excited when it did happen. This rationality was always a reaction to something someone would say, where I actually understood them and could answer them back or give an opinion. It was almost like a reflex that I could not control, and being out of control of my own rationality was as frustrating to me as being out of control of all of my limbs. Don't bother asking me when I started to peak, because I didn't quite know what time was, how it worked, how to spell it, or if it even existed in the same universe that I had landed up in. I remember running around thinking I was trapped in this insane person's body, trying to function like a normal human being, and when Muffy asked me to bring him the bong, I had finally found something to keep me sane. I was now going to be the designated do things for other people guy. This kept me safe, almost thinking straight, and with a sense of purpose. I got people smokes, I put people's cell phones in safe places, and generally did a lot of shit. I also fucked up a lot of the time, forgetting what people wanted, or losing track of 2 things at once. Eventually, I lost interest and gave up, probably 5 minutes later, and found myself back where I started. Fucked. I still had half a bag left. No one else did. Jay had a little bit left, but Muffy's and Zing's were all gone. I was very surprised that anyone could have had that much, and still seemed to be functioning on some kind of human level. I asked Jay if he wanted some, and he was very keen, but he never took any. I was running around for quite some time with the bag in my hand, waiting for Jay to munch them with me. But since he had by now retreated to the sloth position by the fire, it didn't look like he was keen at all. But I still ran around for about an hour with the shrooms and the chocolate in my hand waiting for him. I had now found a way to keep myself calm. I noticed that Zing was always off in some far-out position, looking up at the stars or something. And when I approached him about this, he told me to try it. So I did. I noticed that the trees had now all been leaning inward, and had probably been doing so for some time. The clouds had now cleared, and the sky was this brilliant dark blue-black colour with these immense lights shining through it. When I looked carefully, I noticed that these were stars. I also noticed that when I unfocused my attention on the sky, it seemed to take the form of a big mural painted above us. Everything had taken on a spherical design, where everything was around us. The trees bent inward, and so did the sky. And this calmed me down considerably. Now that I was doing okay, I made Zing come for a walk with me to the far outskirts of the camping ground. We found our way to this bridge and made our way back to where Zing wanted to go swimming. There was no way I was going for a swim, so I went back to camp and ate the rest of my shrooms. After all this, there wasn't much else that happened, only a lot more of what I just explained. I also had some of Jay's shrooms, and by now had truly burnt myself out. I had thrown myself into a standstill and my legs were killing me from standing for so long. I didn't want to think anymore, and I was so tired of doing so that I very nearly went to bed after Jay's shrooms. We all stayed awake till around 1:30 and smoked ourselves into a rotten stupor with all the hash we had. I cannot tell you what my mates were experiencing because I do not know, but I do know that they were a lot more relaxed about everything than I was, and I think the reason for this is because I'm way more of a logical thinker than my mates. I couldn't let go of reality and was always trying to compare what I thought, felt, and saw to reality, which I really couldn't do. This is why I panicked, and this is why people would probably say I had a bad trip. But as far as I'm concerned, I had one fucking amazing time, and would most certainly do the same thing again. I'd probably be way more relaxed about the whole psychedelia the next time, as I now know what to expect. For a while, everything was far too much for me to handle, but I made it through. I just had to let go. There were no after effects other than my cheeks feeling a little sore from smiling and laughing the whole time. What a brilliant experience.